How did this man become the king of cars? After all, he never learned to read blueprints in his life. Engineers simply made a wooden model for him, which he studied. What life principles did this man follow? Let's see what the secret is of one of the most famous industrialists in history. Henry Ford was born on July 30, 1863, in the family of a Michigan farmer immigrant from Ireland. The father was unhappy with his son, viewing him as indolent and unmanly. The son acted like a misplaced prince on the farm. Henry reluctantly did everything he was told. He hated chickens, cows, and couldn't stand milk. From an early age, I thought that many things could be done differently, in some other way. Every morning, Henry had to climb a steep ladder, carrying buckets of water. Why do this every day, when you can just lay 2 meters of water pipes under the ground? When his son turned 12, the father gave him a pocket watch. The boy couldn't resist, unscrewed the cover with a screwdriver, and something wonderful opened up to his eyes. Parts of the mechanism interacted with each other. One wheel moved another, every little screw here was important. After taking apart and rebuilding the watch, the boy contemplated extensively. The world resembles a vast machine, with each action triggering another and everything having its controls. To succeed, one must simply understand which buttons to push. Henry quickly learned to repair watches and for some time even worked, traveling around neighboring farms and taking broken chronometers for repair. The second fascination was the encounter with a locomotive. Henry and his father were returning from the city in a cart when they encountered a huge steam-powered self-propelled machine. Having overtaken the cart and frightened the horses, the smoking and hissing wonder passed by. At that moment, Henry would have given half his life to be there in the driver's cabin. At 15, Ford left school and, without telling anyone, walked to Detroit at night. He would never become a farmer as his father wanted. At the factory where he got a job, they made carriages for horses. He didn't last long here. It was enough for Ford to get to the broken mechanism to understand what was wrong. The gifted newcomer began to be envied by other workers. They did everything to get him out of the factory, and they succeeded in this. Ford was fired. Later, Henry got a job at the shipbuilding plant of the Flower Brothers, and at night he repaired watches to pay for the room. Meanwhile, William Ford decided to make one last attempt to bring his son back to farming. He offered 40 acres of land on the condition that he would never utter the word machine in his life again. Unexpectedly, Henry agreed. The father was pleased, and so was the son. Light-hearted William had no suspicion that his son was simply fooling him. Soon, Henry Ford thought about getting married. Clara Bryant was 3 years younger than him. They met at country dances. Ford was a dazzling dancer and impressed the girl by showing her his pocket watch and claiming that he made it himself. They had a lot in common. Just like Henry, Clara was born into a farmer's family. She was not shy of any work. The girl's parents were hardworking and strict people. Of course, they wouldn't give her away for a young man without a penny to his name, without land or a home. Having built a cozy little house on his plot, Henry settled in it with his young wife. Many years later, the automobile monarch will say, "My wife believed in my success even more firmly than I did. She was always like that." Clara could listen for hours to her husband's discussions about the idea of creating a self-propelled crew. Throughout their long family life, she always managed to maintain an elegant balance. She was interested in her husband's affairs, but never interfered with them. On the farm, he invented a gasoline-powered grain thresher. Ford will sell the patent for this invention to Thomas Edison, and he invites Henry to his company. But even there, in the position of chief engineer, Henry is most attracted to machines. Having married in 1887, he will live with his wife all his life. Once, in response to a journalist's question whether he would like to live another life, Ford answered this way. Interestingly, Henry Ford was a convinced believer in the theory of reincarnation. Specifically, he believed that in his last incarnation, he died as a soldier in the Battle of Gettysburg. Ford described his views in a magazine. From August 26, 1928, I adopted the theory of reincarnation when I was 26 years old. Religion did not provide me with an explanation of this phenomenon. Work did not bring complete satisfaction. Work has no meaning if the experience accumulated in one life we cannot use in another. When I discovered reincarnation for myself, it was like discovering a universal plan. I realized that there was now a real chance to implement my ideas. I was no longer limited by time. I stopped being its slave. Genius is experience. Some believe it is a gift or talent, but in reality, it is the fruit of experience accumulated over many lifetimes. Some souls are older than others, and, accordingly, know more. The understanding of reincarnation calmed my mind. If you are recording this conversation, write that it helps to calm the mind. I would very much like to share with everyone the enlightenment that such a view of life brings. Despite all this, Ford paid great attention to diet and a healthy lifestyle. On the gates of his factories was a sign saying, "Remember, God created man without spare parts." In November of 1893, Clara gave Ford his only son. They named the boy Edsel. That same year, in the brick shed behind the two-room house where he lived with his wife Clara, Ford completed the construction of his first experimental car. The inventor worked for 2 days straight without rest, and at 2 o'clock in the morning on June 4th, he came to tell his wife that the car was ready, and he was about to test it. The quadricycle car moved on 4 bicycle tires. In the same year of 1893, Henry Ford became the chief engineer of the Edison Company, which specialized in lighting Detroit. And then, in 1899, he became the chief engineer of the Detroit Automobile Company. But after a while, they began to notice that Ford was spending all his mental and physical energy on the gasoline trolley, and not at all on work, in the office. Henry was offered a managerial position on the condition that he abandon his invention. Ford was torn. The arguments were compelling. There was no savings to support the family. Everything went into the construction of the cart. Clara told Henry Ford that she would support his decision, regardless of what he chose to do. But Henry remains faithful to his idea of turning the car from a luxury item into a means of transportation. And full of hope for the future, he leaves his job. If you have enthusiasm, you can accomplish anything you want. Enthusiasm is the foundation of any progress. After all, if Ford has set out to turn millions of ordinary pedestrians into proud car owners, nothing can stop him on his chosen path. When it seems like the whole world is against you, remember that an airplane takes off against the wind. The Detroit Automobile Company didn't last long. There was no demand for the car, as there is none for any new product. "I left my post, deciding never to hold a dependent position again," Ford recalled. Having resigned, Ford set about selling himself. He was looking for substantial partners, as Henry himself did not have such money. And in his new venture, he saw himself as a supplier of ideas. Despite no buyers for his ideas, he remained obsessed with creating an accessible car for all. Ford was right to think that ideas themselves are valuable. But any idea, in the end, is just an idea. The challenge is to implement it practically. But does he give up? No. Ford once again demonstrates his approach to life's failures, considering them an opportunity to start over, but more wisely. He believed that honest failure is not destructive, but the fear of failure is. It's hard to disagree with him, as there's hardly a person in the world who always gets everything right the first time. Perseverance, determination, and resilience are the qualities of a true fighter. People give up far more often than they endure defeat, so believed Henry Ford. In 1902, he makes a stunning advertisement for his car. Behind the wheel of his machine in car races, he overtakes the champion of America. Ford excels at creating effective PR campaigns, recognizing the crucial role of advertising. "If I had $4, I would give 3 of them for advertising." In 1903, it was registered, Henry became the chief executive. Being a self-taught mechanic himself, Ford eagerly hired such self-starters at the factory. Specialists are so smart and experienced that they know exactly why something can't be done. They see limits and obstacles everywhere. If I wanted to destroy competitors, I would give them a bunch of specialists. He puts all his efforts into creating a universal car that is simple, reliable, and cheap. At that time, the idea of a car for everyone was incomprehensible to many. A mass-produced car was something fantastic, like a mass-produced airplane is now. However, all this worries Henry little, as he believes that everything can be done better than it has been done so far. In 1905, Ford's financial partners disagreed with his intention to produce cheap cars, as expensive models were in demand. The holder of the main share package, Alexander Malcolmson, sold his share to Ford, after which Henry Ford became the owner of the controlling stake and the president of the company. Here's another interesting episode. The young Ford company faced competition from a syndicate of automakers claiming a monopoly in this field. In 1879, Selden patented a car project that was not built. It contained only a description of the basic principles. The first court case they won for patent infringement woke up the owners of a number of car companies to acquire the corresponding licenses and create an association of legal manufacturers. The court case against, initiated by Selden, lasted from 1893 to 1911. The legal manufacturers threatened to sue Ford's car buyers, but he acted bravely, publicly promising his buyers help and protection, even though the financial capabilities of the legal manufacturers far exceeded his own. In 1909, Ford lost the case, but after reviewing the case, the court decided that none of the automakers had violated Selden's right, as they used a different engine design. The monopoly union fell apart right there, and Henry gained a reputation as a fighter for consumer interests. This revealed one of the 4 management principles of Henry Ford, which he formulated as paying attention to competition. Let the one who handles the job best do the work. Any attempt to upset her or the affairs of crime, because it means an attempt to upset in the pursuit of another person's vigorous life and establish in place of a healthy mind the dominance of force. To say the word, the other 3 principles of management, which Ford named, are no less worthy. Prioritize working for the common good over profits. However, remember that without profits, no business can survive. In essence, there is nothing foolish in profit. A well-established enterprise, bringing great benefit, should bring a large income and will bring such. But profitability should result from useful work, not lie in its foundation. Or take the case of the modern cheap buy, expensive sell. Producing does not mean buying cheap and selling expensive. This rather means buying raw materials at reasonable prices and processing them with, possibly, insignificant additional costs into a quality product, then distributed among consumers. To gamble, speculate, and act dishonestly only means to complicate the process mentioned. And finally, the 4th philosophical principle. Do not fear the future, and do not relate almost reverently to the past. Whoever fears the future, unfortunately, limits the scope of his activity himself. Failures only give a reason to start over and more wisely. Honest failure is not shameful. Shame is the fear of failure. The past is only useful in the sense that it points out the ways and means for development. With this education, which left much to be desired, Henry received in the church school. Even as an adult, Ford, making important agreements, still made mistakes. Once he sued a newspaper that called him ignorant and responded to the accusation of being uneducated. If I needed to answer your foolish questions, I would just have to press a button in my office, and specialists with answers would appear at my disposal. The automobile king never learned to read blueprints in his entire life. Engineers crafted wooden models for the boss to evaluate. Ford saw illiteracy not as a drawback, but as an unwillingness to use one's mind in life. The hardest thing in the world is to think with your own head. That's probably why so few people engage in it. Ford simplifies car construction, standardizes parts and mechanisms. He pioneers conveyor use in car production globally. This innovative solution in mass production puts him at the forefront of the auto industry and leaves competitors far behind. And although the conveyor was used in the 19th century and before, when we say conveyor, we mean Henry Ford, the man who achieved his dream and unprecedented success with its help. Henry Ford's real triumph was the introduction of the Model T, which changed all orientations in the concept of car manufacturing. He created it like a sculptor, cutting off all the excess, creating not a luxury toy for the chosen ones, but a product affordable for millions of average Americans. The success exceeded all expectations. Over the years of production, more than 15 million Model T cars were sold, conquering the consumer market. In 1909, it cost $850. In 1913, $550. In 1914, the company marks the release of the 10 millionth. At that time, 10% of all cars in the world were these machines. In the same year of 1914, Henry Ford decides to raise the workers' pay to $5 a day. He believed that if you require someone to give their time and body energy, then make sure they are not experiencing financial difficulties. Perhaps one of Ford's main secrets lies not so much in manufacturing innovations as in the human approach to the fellow man. My secret to success lies in the ability to understand another person's point of view, and to look at things from his as well as from my own point of view. Workers called him the man who invented the weekend, and this man further rewarded non-smoking and non-drinking workers. People lined up to get a job at Ford. He only evaluated readiness to work when selecting personnel. I don't care where a man came from prison or from Harvard, we hire the man, not the history. There were no issues with staff turnover, although the discipline at the factory was strict. Time doesn't like it when it's wasted, Ford said, not allowing himself or his workers to relax. He was convinced that only two incentives make people work: the desire for a salary and the fear of losing it. At his company, Ford implemented the principle of less administrative spirit in business life and more business spirit in administration. Deciding that paperwork slows down the car production process, Ford at his factory, he dismissed statistics as mere wandering. Ford's company lacked production meetings, unnecessary documentation, and interdepartmental communication. Who should be the boss? It's just as well to ask who should be the tenant in this apartment. Of course, the one who can sing tenor, Ford declared, now a full-fledged owner of a huge company. By the early 1920s, Henry Ford was selling more cars than all his competitors combined. Of every 10 cars bought in the United States of America, 7 were his make. It was during this time that he earned the title of the Automobile King. Ford invests money in buying other ore factories, coal mines, and everything needed for car production. Thus, the owner of factories, newspapers, and steamships creates an entire empire, independent of foreign trade. Simultaneously, a thriving industrialist doesn't concentrate on money. It is to him that the phrase, "the main benefit of capital is not to make more money, but to make money for the betterment of life," belongs. In 1922, Ford releases his autobiographical book, My Life, My Achievements, written vividly and figuratively. However, neither competitors nor consumers allow Henry Ford to peacefully retire, living off the fruits of past successes. Sales of the most affordable car begin to fall. The creator of the Ford T believed that if they bought once, they would always buy. However, people wanted variety, and Ford could only offer a car of any color, as long as that color was black. The company offered customers different car models and beat Ford's competitive advantage by selling cars on credit. By the year 1927, Ford T sales had dropped so much that Ford faced bankruptcy. Well-wishers predicted the businessman's downfall, but Ford did not give up this time either. If yesterday's beliefs were wrong, it's simply a reason to devise something new. They are everywhere, these strange people who don't know that yesterday was yesterday, and who wake up every morning with last year's thoughts in their head. Ford showed by his example that positive thinking works and brings results. If you are sure that success will come to you, so it will be. Thinking about the future, the desire to do more, puts the mind in such a state that it seems that nothing is impossible. Ford halts production and lays off almost all workers, while he himself works on creating the next car. In 1927, he presents a new model prototype of the Soviet Victory, which is advantageously different from the existing ones in terms of technical characteristics and appearance. Ford comes out victorious again. He leads the company until his 30s, then hands over the business to his son, but returns to the head of the company again. After his death in 1943, Ford, a descendant of Irish immigrants, was perhaps one of the most notorious anti-Semites on the planet. From 1918, a newspaper was published on the industrialist's money, in which, among other things, anti-Semitic materials were published. including the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. In 1920, a selection of articles was published as a separate book under the title International Jewry: The Original World Problem. Furthermore, until the end of 1922, 3 more volumes were published: Jewish Activity in the United States of America, Jewish Influence in American Life, and Aspects of Jewish Power in the United States. In 1920, a Jewish journal threw down a challenge to Ford, offering him to choose a jury from well-known American leaders to whom he would present evidence of the existence of a Jewish conspiracy. If Ford failed to convince the jury of the conspiracy's existence, he would have to admit his mistake and publish the names of those who convinced him of this conspiracy. Ford ignored the challenge, and the publications persisted. In this campaign, Ford received support from some Americans, including the famous Thomas Edison. Then, 119 prominent Americans, including 3 presidents, 9 secretaries, 1 cardinal, and many other public and government figures, were visible. The United States of America published an open letter criticizing Ford's anti-Semitism. They wrote that Ford was challenging American civic and democratic principles. In 1924, Aaron Shapiro initiated a libel case, naming not the newspaper or editor as the defendant, but Ford personally. In March of 1927, newspaper editor William Cameron testified under oath that the newspaper materials with Ford were not discussed. Cameron asserted that he never sent the newspaper owner signal copies of the weekly and never saw Henry Ford read even one of the articles. Cameron's assertions were met with great skepticism by the public. After this, Shapiro summoned Ford himself to court, who long evaded receiving the summons and ultimately did not appear at the court hearing. Another lawsuit against Ford was filed by the author of the book The History of a Deception: The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, Hermann Bernstein. In the end, Ford resolved the conflict out of court, including with the help of a large payment, the size of which was kept secret under the terms of the deal and is unknown to this day. At the same time, Ford renounced his anti-Semitic statements and sent a letter to the press on July 7, 1927, in which he apologized to Jews for the harm caused to them. He promised to remove the published materials from circulation and ensure that similar attacks would not appear in his publications. By that time, the treatises published by Ford had already found their readers. Among them was the future leader of the Third Reich, Adolf Hitler. 5 Mein Kampf. The only American mentioned by the author turns out to be the founder of Ford Motors. Every year he gives them more and more control over the manufacturers. 120 million nation. Only one great man, Ford, arouses their hatred: those who maintain complete independence. The sympathy was strong and mutual. Henry Ford impressed the head of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. According to some researchers, the American began to provide financial assistance to the Nazis long before Hitler and his followers came to power. In the early 1930s in the United States of America, Hitler was considered a radical but quite a manageable character. In 1931, an American journalist from the publication took an interview with Hitler and drew attention to the portrait of Henry Ford hanging in the Führer's office. Interested in Hitler's attitude towards the head, the reporter heard in response, "I consider Henry Ford my inspirer." With Hitler's rise to power in Germany, both friendly and business relations were established between him and Ford. By the most modest estimates, Ford's investments in the German economy on the eve of World War II amounted to more than $17 million. According to American military historian Henry Schneider, Ford helped the Germans obtain rubber, which was vital for German industry. The German branch was engaged in the production of cars, which were used for the needs of the Wehrmacht. The production of heavy trucks for Hitler's army in the 1940s took place at the German plant of the Ford Company. Although formally the father, the founder of the company, managed by his son, had no relation to this business. An even more interesting situation arose with the French branch of Ford. After 1940, it found itself in territory occupied by the Germans, but did not shut down production. Aircraft engines, trucks, and cars, all of this was sent to arm the German army. It came to complete absurdity. For example, in 1942, American Ford companies under Lend-Lease were assembling cars for the needs of the Red Army, and at the same time, the same cars were going to the Eastern Front, replenishing the mechanized parts of the Wehrmacht. In fact, cooperation with Soviet Russia was established much earlier, which was modestly silenced in the country of the Victorious Revolution. Soviet GAZ cars at the dawn of their era were copies of Ford designs. Henry Ford signed a contract with the leadership of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which had two main points. First, an automobile factory was built in the Soviet Union using Henry Ford's achievements, which was later tasked with producing cars according to the company's designs. And Soviet workers were sent to Detroit factories in the United States of America for internships. And the Second Soviet Union signed a multi-million-dollar contract for the supply of Ford cars and tractors. This fact was hidden from ordinary people, as was much else at that time. Already in our time in 2003, journalist Max Wallace published The American Axis, Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh, and the Rise of the Third Reich, presenting evidence of their close ties to the Nazis. Not only Henry Ford, but also his son Edsel, who was at that time the direct head of Ford Motors. At the same time, Wallace points out that the labor of prisoners from concentration camps at European Ford family enterprises was used even before the formal transition of factories under Nazi control. This is how representatives reacted to this book.
Henry Ford was a remarkable innovator, but also made mistakes. The text offers nothing new about his activities.
But let's go back to the previous years, to the year 1938, to the 75th anniversary of Henry Ford. Friend Adolf awarded the industrialist with the Order of the German Eagle, the highest award of the Third Reich for foreigners. When the German consul handed Hitler's award to Ford, the creator of the auto industry did not look gloomy. In 1945, when Hitler settled accounts with life in the Berlin bunker, Henry Ford finally retired from business, handing over the presidency to his grandson, 28-year-old Henry Ford. The young heir began to work energetically, preventing the looming bankruptcy on the horizon. Young Henry was far from his grandfather's views and made considerable efforts to change the company's reputation. In particular, Henry Ford financed several large Jewish organizations and founded a car assembly plant in Israel. He sponsored the filming of the Holocaust movie Schindler's List. That's what Ford was like, embodying the American dream. And when journalists asked him what such a wealthy man could wish for, he answered them like this:
I would like to make the world better because I live in it.
Did he really make it better? And if so, how exactly? It's time to move to the comments under the video and get acquainted with the opinions of deeply respected experts. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, for liking this film, and see you on the Cremola channel.